McCUISTION, for over 28 years talking about things that matter with people who care. Production of McCUISTION is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation, helping to educate the public about the fundamental principles of their democracy and thus be in a position to help formulate public policy. Moss Adams LLP, certified public accountants and consultants, providing industry-smart tax, assurance, and consulting solutions to help businesses and their owners succeed since 1913. The University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.
Do you get tired of seeing screaming mobs marching in protest of one thing or another? Do you get tired of watching 6 television pundits yelling at each other or speak so offensively that you change the channel? Well, if you answered yes to either or both questions, then this program is for you. We're going to visit with a couple of radio hosts who think they found an answer to the lack of civility in dialogues over political and other controversial topics. Joining us via Skype from Iowa is Steve Putney. He's a 40-year veteran of broadcasting and marketing as a consultant and sales trainer. He's currently with Pritchard Broadcasting in Iowa, where he directs news coverage for 7 stations. But he's joining us as the producer and co-host of Men in the Middle. Welcome, Steve. Are you here?
I am with you. Pleasure to be here.
Good. Love that Iowa sticker in the back as well, 1952. So glad to have you. Your co-host is sitting here with me. His name is Jim Patrick. And Jim Patrick has... well, I started to say a checkered background. I'm not sure checkered is right. Let's try this.
Could be.
All right. A writer, a founder of think tanks, a political scientist focusing on domestic and global socioeconomic trends, and as a veteran broadcaster, a co-host of Men in the Middle, of course. And as if that wasn't enough, you worked with us in the very beginning of the McCUISTION program as a consultant. So there we have it.
Right out of your kitchen.
Right out of our kitchen is right. Absolutely right. So welcome to the program. So what is it that you are doing? What is this Men in the Middle thing? And let's put up their graphic number 4 to show what their logo looks like so everybody will know what graphic number 4 looks. Here's their logo. Clowns to the left and jokers to the right. You look like the clown in the picture. So what is it that you guys are doing and what prompted you to do this?
Well, Steve and I have known each other since about 2006. The fact of the matter is we've never met each other in person, but we've had many debates on the phone. And one day we were having such a debate and he said, we ought to make this into a TV show, a radio show. I said, nobody wants to hear us. He said, yes, they do. We're talking about something different. So immediately the old song that was clowns to the left me, jokers to the right, stuck in the middle with you, came into mind. And we said, we can tell a story here that talks about the story behind the news versus all the snark that's in the news. And very similar to your approach, we're trying to talk to people that know. We have about 300,000 listeners worldwide, mostly on podcast. We're also in Burlington, Iowa, and Willimantic, Connecticut on broadcast radio, and expanding rapidly. And we have a large following. In fact, one of our largest followings, believe it or not, is Russian. The Russians love us. I just wonder if they're going to be coming soon.
The Russians may be coming, but are you involved in the Mueller trade? Are you involved in trying to find out if President Trump was involved with the Russians and collusion? Is that part of what you do?
I don't do that, and I had no knowledge of Watergate either.
Okay, good. You knew none of that. So, Steve, why did you team up with Jim? I mean, you guys have known each other. What prompted you to think about putting this thing on radio and podcast?
Well, as Jim said, we began just having a discussion amongst ourselves. And after spending years in broadcasting, it occurred to me that we were discussing something that you weren't hearing on radio anywhere, that you weren't seeing on television anywhere. We were talking about what was going on, but we were talking about it, I guess you would say, with a more common sense approach. We weren't to the left, we weren't to the right, and we were asking the question, why is it the way that it is? And so the obvious thing to me was, you know what, there's a need for this. There is a place in the marketplace for this where people in the middle can have people talking to them versus preaching at them.
Well, from your standpoint, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, you and Jim didn't necessarily agree on everything. I mean, it wasn't that you guys were holding hands and singing Kumbaya. I think you had some pretty incredibly difficult discussions about some issues along the way too, didn't you, or not?
Oh, we have had some very heated discussions between Jim and I. We have had some disagreements. We've gotten mad at each other. The nice thing is about having a 12-year friendship is we get over it. But we recognize that there is a place where you have to sit back and you have to listen to the other person's side. Whether you agree with it or not isn't necessarily the issue. It's listening to it. And every once in a while, it may change your opinion on something, or they may share something with you that you hadn't thought about. And again, those differences that we have, I think, is what actually makes the show work. If we were in unison with everything, then we would just be more talking heads. But we actually have disagreements on the show, and we don't hide them from our listeners.
Well, it seems that you can disagree without being disagreeable. That seems to be an art form today too, doesn't it?
It seems to be something, Dennis, that people have lost. Everybody is yelling at everybody. Everybody's getting mad. Everybody's getting their feelings hurt. And there is, I guess, a line where you start calling names and you start getting snarky, where maybe you should be called out on it. But yeah, having the discussion and having rapport, having the ability to sit and listen to another side and not be offended by it, and understand that they have a right to that opinion, whether you agree with it or not. They have a right to that opinion. And again, that was something that we wanted to bring to America and actually the world through podcast. Was here's an example of the way that we should be comporting ourselves.
All right, Jim, what kind of guests do you do? What kind of topics do you cover? Give us some idea.
We have many of the same guests you see on CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and all over the broadcast networks. Now, we generally don't talk about the things that they are talking about in the news, but we go back one step and said, what happened? What happened with you in this? We've had Chris Whipple as an example. We've had the author of The Gatekeepers. We've had, everybody's seen Richard Painter. He's been on 3 or 4 times. We've had Dennis McCUISTION on. That one didn't, it worked out great.
Yeah, right.
But we try and inject humor where there normally isn't humor and get people to laugh about themselves and cut up. Now, Steve and I don't always agree, but most of the time when we don't agree is when he's wrong.
I got it. But at least you can laugh about it. And that, I think humor is a lost art in politics, isn't it? Or am I missing something here?
It is a lost art, and that's why political humor sometimes cuts through the chase. Steve and I come at this thing from 2 different vantage points. I got to tell you, in the last election, Steve called it. I'm a political scientist. I totally missed it. He called it. He knew exactly what was going to happen because he was listening to the heartbeat of the street. And I was out there doing statistics because this was not a normal election. And he called it. And he reminds me of that all the time.
Well, at least you remember that he called it. That's helpful.
Shining his shoes is a bit difficult, though.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that when I was on your program recently, you guys had sort of said that one of you, I won't say which one of you, sort of comes from a little left of center. The other one sort of comes from a little right of center. And yet you build yourself as men in the middle. And so I said, well, how can you be men in the middle if one of you's left of center and one of you's right of center?
Well, I got to stop you because Steve has been accused of being left of center and I've been accused of being right of center, and we cross back and forth. People don't know what we are except that we're crazy.
Okay, well, crazy is not a bad thing. It's not on this chart I'm going to show. So let me just say to that person watching that when I was on their program recently, we talked about a lot of things, including the television program as well. But I said to them, and you didn't know I was going to do this, and I didn't know I was going to do it, I said, let me give you guys a test to see where you really stand politically. You're building yourself as men in the middle, and so I decided to give them a test. I gave them what's called a Nolan quiz, and many years ago we did it on our program, and this is what happened with the people who were in the audience that night. And this is the world's smallest political quiz, and so if you can get a shot of that right next to me, yeah. So I gave them 10 questions, and we're not going to take the time to go over those tonight, But I gave them 10 economic questions, and I gave them 10 political questions. And, 5 economic questions and 5 political questions. And they had choices. They could answer yes, no, or maybe to these things. And one of them was something like free trade is a good idea. And one of them was something like we should eliminate almost all taxes. One of them was we shouldn't be putting people in jail for having drugs, and those kinds of questions. And when we gave this to our audience years ago, this is the chart that we used. And instead of having this left-right spectrum that we sometimes use, where are you to the left, and we're far left, or we're far right, this gets a little more nuanced, and it gives you actually 5 different places to be. And our audience that night happened to be, there was only one person down there who was a statist, which is basically authoritarian big government. There were several people who were libertarian, that's at the top, as you can see over there. Right conservative over here, we had several of those. Left liberal, we had several of those. But the majority of the people who were in our audience that night ranked themselves as a centrist. Now, I want to tell the person watching this program, if they're watching and listening to your podcast and your radio broadcast, that when I gave them this, both of these individuals were in fact in the middle. And so they said yes, and it confirmed that. So I just want you to know that this is a scientific study right here that says we confirm that you guys are men in the middle.
It was an immaculate conception.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. So I think you guys were glad to have the confirmation of that, at least, because other people have said, well, you come from here, you come from there, so you are in the middle. Now, politically, Steve, when you guys have somebody who is, let's say, partially a lightning rod as a personality and liable to say things that could offend people, what do you tell them up front before you start the program? And then how would you handle them if they get off track a little bit during the program?
Well, Dennis, before I answer that, I've got to back up a little bit, because in the interest of keeping things very, very accurate, we said that we had disagreements, but then Jim said that the only time we have disagreements is when I'm wrong, so we apparently have never had a disagreement. So that out of the way, first of all.
Okay, good.
And we have had some tough guests. I mean, we really have had some tough guests. We start off with a conversation with people ahead of time, and we tell them, look, we are non-confrontational. You can come on, and we want you to be able to get what you want to say out. But we tell them we want you to have this to be more like if you were sitting around the table with a bunch of friends having a beer or a cup of coffee, and you're having a conversation, so that they understand that we aren't going to be confrontational with them. We want them to present their ideas. And if they start to steer away a little bit, then we kind of reel it in a little bit with our questions and stuff. But for the most part, Jim, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think we've really had, other than one person that we ended up just not using because they were way off. We haven't had anybody really throw us any major curves.
In fact, Steve, we've had a lot of folks come on. We ask them at the end of each interview, what'd you think of it? These are the people who play in the big leagues normally, and they say to us, you guys are the only ones that allow us to say we want to say. We want to hear from you, not necessarily us. So we don't come up with the I gotcha type questions. We treat them with respect, and they give us the same respect back by really sharing what they think, and sometimes we collect some inside information that you don't hear any.
Well, and the other thing is you have, how many minutes typically? Is it 30 or an hour? I forget. Is it 30-minute segments or 15-minute segments? What is it exactly?
We have 1 hour, but I'm going to refer that to the producer of the show, who reminds me I go undertime or overtime all the time. Take it away, Steve.
Our timing on that, Dennis, runs, we do 15-minute segments, 14 minutes and 30 seconds effectively of talk. We've got 3 of those. And then Jim and I try to end every show with what we refer to as just kind of a fun segment, something kind of uplifting, make people laugh, lighten the mood a little bit, just something positive for people to carry with them.
Well, here's what you guys do that we do on this program, and we talked about it when I was on your program as well. And that is, just like you, when I talk to people, or our producer, Dennis McCUISTION, talk to people to book them for this program, when we tell them that we're going to not yell at each other, we're not going to talk over each other, we're not going to have 6 satellite folks trying to get in 30 seconds worth of stuff in this time, they go, yes. And then secondly, you give them enough time, as do we here. It always seems too short.
Right.
But you give them, you said you hear things that they don't say other. They don't have time to say them on the other programs because the things are this short. And a sound bite, used to be, I don't know, a minute and a half. Now it's probably 15, 20 seconds.
Right.
And so that's often all they get someplace else. And so that means that what you're able to do is to give them more time and a more robust interview, I think. Isn't that right?
That's right. And we're not looking to catch the soundbite. We're not sending this to be used in the program later or breaking news. We're there to learn and to share this with really a worldwide audience that look at it and say, geez, I never knew that. It's kind of the aha factor. And I think that's what we do best. Of course, I get to deal with Mr. Big Voice here who does news all week. I was always the color commentator, analyst type, and he deals with hard news, and he comes at it and does a great job. And with that voice, I'm envious.
Well, he does have a great voice. And how much, Steve, of, let's just say, what you know because of what you do, does it help you in personalizing the questions and all the topics that you talk about, and how important is that?
That's an interesting question, because when we started doing this and we started interviewing people, we walked in, we kind of had a preconceived notion of what we were going to talk about, where we wanted the interview to go. And it took us about 2 interviews to figure out if we sat back and had a conversation, the person we're interviewing is going to lead us in directions that we didn't expect to go. In almost every case, we allow the interview to take some unexpected turns, and we end up with some of the best programs that we've ever had. From the standpoint of what I do, it keeps me informed. It keeps me up to date with what's going on. I'm aware of, I guess you would say, the details of the world. But it really doesn't prepare us for the type of interviews we do because, like I said, our guests are coming on. They're giving us background information that, quite frankly, we're surprised to hear many times ourselves, Dennis.
Well, that's a good way of looking at it. And Jim, you keep up with everything. It seems like all the thing I said in the interview, when I introduced you, that you keep up with everything in some way or the other. The good thing about having the 2 of you is that if one of you doesn't think of the right question, often the other one does, I suppose.
We pivot off each other very, very well, and when things get a little dry, we get funny. We don't even try to get funny, we just look funny.
Well, now that people know what you look like, we can all agree with that.
Well,
I don't think there's any doubt about that.
That's good.
But what do you want people? What do you want your viewers to know? What do you want them to think? How do you want them to act? What do you want them to do as a result of getting the information from your guests? I mean, we have certain things we'd like for them to think about, but what do you guys want them to do?
We want them to understand that you can have civil discussions with people that may not at all agree with you. And you may not agree with them, but you may learn something. And we're going to give you a little more information that you didn't have before, and you can walk away and process it whatever way you want, but you've got the information that you didn't have before you joined us. And hopefully you had a good time doing it.
Yeah, that's good. Now, Steve, do you get a lot of feedback, a little feedback, occasionally an email, somebody sending you a bomb, or how does this work?
I haven't got any bombs yet. Also, haven't got any cookies. I keep hoping for a package of cookies. They never come.
You better share.
But, we get a lot of different feedback. I wish we got more feedback. It's one of those things where some shows generate more than others, and I'm always surprised which shows generate the most feedback. Mostly what we hear from people is that we got that aha factor, that we presented them with some information that they didn't have before they learned something. And ultimately, from the standpoint of when we were kicking off the show, that was one of our major goals was, we want to educate so that people can make informed decisions. That's the role we want to take.
Well, education is obviously what we do as well. It's not a lot of education on television and radio these days, at least not on purpose. I don't think, do you?
No, and a lot of it is commentary. We don't really commentate much. We've done it a couple times, but we ask the questions, and we ask the questions that brings out the real feelings. We don't control the conversation and say, hey, look, we're the only way to think, and this is what we know, and here's all the facts we can gather. It's not the way we operate.
We have a graphic number 3, and it's a quote from a guy named Andrew McCarthy, and it was at the end of a long article that he wrote recently, but I thought it would particularly tie in well with the program we're talking about here. So here's what he says. He said, many people on both sides of the political divide complain that our discourse is broken. It won't be repaired until we stop portraying our political opponents as treasonous enemies, and until each side unambiguously condemns activists of any stripe who cross the line from legitimate dissent into violence and the techniques of disruption that make civil discourse impossible. It's time to get a grip, he said. We did a recent program with a guy named Robert Hall and talked about this idea of just escalating all of this venom that comes in the 5 steps into that, from stereotyping and disassociating and polarization and all that. I get a sense that you guys like us are trying to work against that trend.
We're not preaching peace and love. We are saying give the other person a chance. Listen to what they have to say. If you disagree with them on most things, there may be a few things that you could agree with them on if you really sat down and discussed it with them. Now, Robert talks about tribes and war paint and all that type of stuff. And you can't really compromise, as Henry Clay, the great compromiser, might say, unless you're willing to listen to the other guy. If you're screaming at him, there's no discussion.
Well, let's talk about compromise for just a second. I want to get Steve's opinion first, and I want to get yours. So, Steve, without giving you any context on this, what do you think of the idea of compromise in a political situation?
Well, without giving me any context, I think compromise in a political situation is what this country has been founded on. I think the ability of our legislators to work on behalf of their constituents and find a way to make things work has been the cornerstone. And I think really, and I'm going to say 16 years that we have kind of lost that. And I would like to see us get back to that. But that begins with the voters. And, you know, we're coming up to an election, and it's getting the right people in the seats that are not going to be divisive, that are not going to be tied to their party so much that they can't reach across the aisle and make things happen. So from my standpoint, I think compromise is a must in a political situation.
Jim?
The problem is super PACs. They don't allow compromise because those that want to compromise will be punished in the primaries or punished in the conventions. So we live in a constant campaign mode. You can't have compromise if that's going to be the party dictating. It's got to be people actually wanting to reach across the aisle and find something in common. Dialogue, Dennis, makes us better. It refines what we're talking about, and it gets us to the point that we can embrace change. Right now, we're not only not embracing change, we don't even know how to look at each other without finding disgust.
There are 4 really heatedly contested, if that's the right word, hotly contested elections for congressmen in Texas right now. One of them is here in Dallas, and I'll be moderating a debate. The bill is a debate tomorrow between the incumbent and his Democratic colleague. And while we build it as a debate because we want people to come, I'm actually going to do it as a dialogue and more of a Q&A thing with the 2 of them. I know both of them. I know one of them pretty well. I've met the other one. Both of them seem to be gentlemen. I think we can make this thing happen. But the reason I ask about compromise is this. There was I don't know if it was Wall Street Journal or Dallas Morning News this last week, was a big article on compromise. And my idea on compromise is this. I agree with Steve in terms of the fact it's important, but there are certain things that you can compromise about and certain things you can't. And here's the way I'd try to divide it. There are certain things you can't compromise on, and that's principle. If I say to you, Jim, I want to cut off your leg,
Please
and
don't.
you say, please, and you say, well, no, I don't want to do that. Okay, well then compromise with me. Let me just cut off your hand. Okay, that compromise, in my opinion, doesn't work. It's a principle thing. Somebody says we want to go and shoot every person we can find in this radius, and somebody says, no, let's just shoot half of them. That doesn't work. Now, if you're saying, am I right about this? So situation is, if we say then that we want the military budget to be $500 billion, and the other side says, no, I want it to be 400 billion. Seems like we could compromise on that situation as long as we're not compromising on principle. And that is where I think a lot of politicians miss the boat, because they don't see themselves being able to compromise on some things, but then that means they can't compromise on anything.
When we have safe states, safe districts in gerrymandering, you have no compromise. You win the primary and you're there. But when you have states changing from red or blue to purple, now we've got to talk to everybody because the large majority are independents.
And now we're out of time. So Steve, thank you for joining us. Jim, thank you for being here with us in the studio, my friend.
Thank you, always.
And so here's what I'd like to suggest for you and me, and that is that we start with each of us personally. Really examine how we discuss controversial topics and see if we can start by finding out how someone else with a different opinion really got to their position. Then, and only then, can we understand where they're coming from. Try to avoid flamethrowers if we can. And when we really want to watch intelligent people discuss important topics without being disrespectful, we can go to McQuistionTV.com. You can follow us on Twitter. Always tune into this program where we talk about things that matter with people who care. And you can go to the podcast and the radio of MITM, Men in the Middle.
A DVD of this program is available for $20 plus $5 postage and handling, and in Texas, applicable tax. For more information, call 214-750-5157 or email NikkiN@NikkiMcQuistion.com. Visit our website at www.McQuistionTV.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at www.twitter.com/McQuistionTV or download McQuistion TV video podcast on iTunes. Production of McQuistion is made possible in part by individual viewers, supporters of the Foundation for Responsible Television, the Hatton W. Sumner's Foundation, helping to educate the public about the fundamental principles of their democracy and thus be in a position to help formulate public policy. Moss Adams LLP, certified public accountants and consultants, providing industry-smart tax, assurance, and consulting solutions to help businesses and their owners succeed since 1913. The University of Texas at Dallas, creating the future.